family or friends or girlfriend? Nobody. I just wanted to go myself with my dogs, Max and Bella, only. That's why I went to the Blue Ridge Mountains with them 2 years back when I wanted to explore it. That week, on Wednesday, I drove up to the mountains. It was uneventful. I reached my favorite spot by late afternoon, a secluded area far from the usual camping sites. The first day was perfect, just me, my dogs, and the heart-throbbing nature. As night fell, I set up my tent, built a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. The dogs, usually playful and energetic, seemed unusually calm, lying close to the fire as if they too were absorbing the peace of the surroundings. As the night got darker, I crawled into my tent, with Max and Bella settling down beside me. The cool mountain air and the sounds of the forest soon helped me doze off faster. Yet, at 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly as Bella, sitting beside me, growled softly. Max was already up, ears perked and eyes fixed on something outside the tent. I sat up, my heart pounding as I tried to listen for what had disturbed them. The night was weirdly silent, save for the occasional rustling of leaves. Then I heard a rhythmic crunching of footsteps coming from the slope behind my tent. My first thought was a bear, but it didn't seem possible. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously unzipped the tent. The dogs were now growling softly, their gaze unwavering towards the hillside. I shone the flashlight in the direction they were looking, and that's when I saw a man, or rather, the silhouette of a man standing motionless among the trees. His clothes were ragged and dirty, blending seamlessly with the environment. For a moment, we locked eyes, and a cold chill ran down my spine. There was something strange about his presence. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there like a statue. I straightened with fear while my mind raced with questions. Who could this person be, and what were his intentions? Gathering my courage, I shouted, "Who's there?" but received no response. The man remained still, his eyes fixed on me. Deciding it was too risky to confront him, I backed away slowly and zipped up the tent. Inside, I grabbed my beer spray and a knife, hoping they would offer some protection if needed. The rest of the night was a nightmare. I could hear noises outside, the sound of twigs snapping and leaves rustling, as if someone was moving around my campsite. My mind kept replaying the image of that man, his vacant eyes and dirty clothes. The dogs were restless, occasionally letting out a low growl, confirming that I wasn't imagining things. Sleep was impossible. Every little sound made me jump, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Time passed in fear. I tried to distract myself with food and Netflix. I didn't remember when time passed, but eventually the sun came up. I instantly unzipped my tent to find my campsite in disarray. My belongings were scattered around, but nothing seemed to be missing. It was as if someone had rifled through my things and then left them as they were. The dogs were sniffing around, still on edge. Without a second thought, I quickly packed up and decided to get out of there. As I loaded my gear into the car, I met another camper who was setting up nearby. I shared my experience with him, and his face grew serious. He told me that several campers had reported similar encounters in the area over the past few months. Strange noises, sightings of a ragged man watching from a distance, and disturbances at their campsite. The local authorities had been notified, but they hadn't found anything conclusive. The drive back home was a blur. My mind was engulfed with fear and anxiety. I didn't know how I managed to drive for long hours, but thankfully, I reached home and just ran to my room. I closed the door behind me and just bumped onto my bed to ease what was in my mind. I let questions fly in my mind with no answers. Weeks passed, but the encounter left a lasting mark on me, a chilling reminder of the unknown dangers that can lurk in even the most serene places. Since that night, I've never gone back to that place, thinking, what if it happens again? This fear is enough to make me change my choices. Now I go to usual parks for solitude with my dogs and play with them. That I also go during daytime. Night is now reserved for sleeping only. Going with campers for trips is a different thing from going yourself. I went all by myself 6 years ago to the Appalachian Trail. With all the excitement, I left for the journey and reached the place. I wanted to avoid the fees for a designated campsite, so I parked my car along an unmarked trailhead, grabbed my backpack, and ventured into the woods. The forest was dense. I found a spot to set up my tent, far enough from the main trail that I felt hidden. After setting up camp and eating a quick meal, I strolled through the area to take in the scenery. It was then I noticed a man walking down the trail. He was alone, dressed in a way that didn't quite fit the environment: jeans and a hoodie, no visible gear or backpack. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just passing through, but something about his demeanor felt off. He wasn't moving like someone out for a leisurely hike. His gait was deliberate, his head swiveling as if searching for something. As I followed the trail back to my tent, I noticed the man again. This time, he had joined a young couple at their campsite. The couple, seated around a small fire, seemed friendly enough. Chatting with him as he loitered nearby, I paused in the shadows, watching for a moment. Something about the way he stood too still, too focused, made me uneasy. I decided it wasn't my business and returned to my tent. The chirping crickets and rustling leaves eventually lulled me to sleep. But sometime in the dead of night, I woke up. It wasn't a noise that startled me, it was the absence of it. The forest, usually alive with nocturnal sounds, had gone eerily silent. I stepped out of my tent, flashlight in hand, and scanned the area. The young couple's campsite, which had been visible from a distance earlier, was dark. The fire was out, and their tent was gone. I felt a pang of unease. Had they packed up and left in the middle of the night? Or had something happened? As I stood there, the beam of my flashlight caught a faint glint further down the trail. A van was parked by the forest exit, its lights off. I hadn't seen it when I first arrived, and its sudden presence sent a chill down my spine. The van sat motionless, almost blending into the shadows. I tried to brush off my anxiety. Maybe it was nothing, just someone sleeping in their vehicle or waiting for morning. But the longer I stared, the more ominous it seemed. My instincts told me it was time to leave. I packed my belongings hastily, my hands trembling as I stuffed my tent into its bag. My heart pounded as I made my way back to my car, every snap of a twig underfoot making me flinch. When I reached the car, I started it quietly, hoping not to draw attention. I eased onto the dirt road, my headlights cutting through the darkness. As I neared the forest exit, I noticed the van again. This time, its engine was running. I tried to stay calm, convincing myself it was a coincidence. But as I drove past, the van's lights flicked on, and it pulled out onto the road behind me. At first, it kept its distance, following at a casual pace. But soon, the vehicle sped up, closing the gap. My unease turned to outright fear when the van began tailgating me, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror. I pressed down on the accelerator, hoping to lose it, but the van matched my speed, swerving dangerously close. My heart raced as it bumped my rear bumper, jolting my car forward. Panic surged through me. Whoever was driving wasn't just following me, they were trying to ram me off the road. Adrenaline kicked in, and I scanned the area for an escape route. Up ahead, I spotted a narrow dirt road branching off to the right. Without hesitation, I veered onto it, my tires skidding on the loose gravel. The van hesitated, its large frame ill-suited for the tight turn, giving me a precious few seconds to put distance between us. I floored the gas pedal, the trees blurring past as I raced down the unfamiliar path. The van's headlights disappeared from my mirrors, but I didn't stop. I drove for miles, navigating the winding road until I finally emerged onto a main highway. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. I pulled over at a brightly lit gas station, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. The fear lingered, coiling tightly in my chest as I replayed the events of the night. Who was that man? And what had happened to the young couple? All remained a mystery that still haunts me. That night changed my outlook on life. I am not the same person anymore. The forest used to be a calm place for me, but now it's a place of secrets that a person should avoid going alone because you never know when, where, and who will come in front to haunt you. It's been years, but nothing can be forgotten. Yet, I have moved on, but it all still lingers at midnight. That day, I reached the deeper section of the Appalachian Trail for a solo camping trip. It all went in vain when my car ran out of gas. The area was remote, so approaching people was out of the question, and the nearest gas station was miles away. I had supplies, a flashlight, and the car for shelter. If needed, I'd wait until morning and flag someone down for help. As the sky grew darker, I noticed a faint pair of headlights approaching. Initially, I was relieved. Maybe someone was there to help me. But when the vehicle came into view, it wasn't the friendly passerby I hoped for. It was a black, old model van, rusted at the edges and rattling as it slowed to a crawl near my car. The driver, an older man with a wiry build and a scruffy face, peered at me through the window. His gaze lingered for a moment too long before the van rolled past and disappeared into the night. I exhaled, chalking up his behavior to simple curiosity. I was, after all, the only person out here. Minutes passed, then an hour. I was sitting in the car, flipping through a book by flashlight, when I heard the sound of an engine rumbling in the distance. The same van returned, its headlights slicing through the darkness. This time, it circled the rest area slowly, like a predator stalking prey. I stayed in the car, heart pounding, hoping he'd lose interest and drive away. But he didn't. He parked at the edge of the lot, far enough to remain shadowed but close enough to see me. I could feel his eyes on me even in the dark. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, without warning, the van's headlights went off. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't see him anymore, but I knew he was there. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he waiting for me to let my guard down? A rustling sound snapped me out of my thoughts. I shone my flashlight toward the woods. The beam caught a brief glimpse of movement, his figure slipping between the trees. I fumbled for my phone, desperately trying to call for help, but the signal was still dead. Panic set in. I couldn't just sit there. I started honking the car horn, hoping to scare him off or attract another passerby. Then, out of nowhere, he reappeared, stepping out of the woods like a ghost. This time, he was closer, standing under the faint light of a nearby lamp. His face was twisted into a sneer, and he began making bizarre hand gestures, pointing at me, then slicing his hand across his throat. I straightened, my mind in alert mode, as he shouted obscenities, his voice echoing in the empty night. My instincts screamed at me to do something, anything. I grabbed the car jack from the trunk and stepped out, the metal cold and heavy in my trembling hands. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice shaking. The man paused, his head cocked as if he were amused. For a moment, he simply stared, then smirked and turned back toward his van. He got in, revved the engine, and sped off into the darkness, the taillights disappearing down the road. I slumped against the car, the jack slipping from my grasp. Relief and terror mixed into a nauseating cocktail. By the time the state patrol arrived an hour later, the man was long gone. I told them everything, down to the smallest detail: the van, the stalking, his threatening gestures. They searched the woods and the surrounding area, but found no trace of him. I left the rest area that night, hitching a ride with one of the officers to the nearest gas station. But the nightmare didn't end there. A few days later, I found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. My stomach dropped as I unfolded it. The message was scrawled in jagged, uneven handwriting. "You got lucky this time. Next time, you won't." I called the police immediately. They took the note as evidence and launched an investigation. For months, they looked for him, patrolling the area and following up on leads. But he was a ghost. No witnesses, no trace of the van, nothing to connect him to his threats. The next day, I left for home and reached civilization safely. All day, I slept to distract myself, yet when I woke up, I was again in the same zone. I remained there for around a month. The next month, after taking help, I got better. Yet still, if I drive past a wooded area and see a black van, all the old memories come alive. That's why, at night, I have stopped traveling alone. That night changed me. I could not see the forest as a place of peace, but as a place of secrets and horror. And this perspective could not be changed with something positive. Stayed at my dad's place, near the Appalachian Trail for around 2 weeks, and now it was time to say goodbye and go back home, because my kids had school starting next week. After a light supper in the early evening, we all warmly hugged my dad and drove off, waving to him until he faded from sight. That evening was quiet and humid. My kids' murmur and laughter worked like music for me. I actually enjoyed driving back home, thanks to the windy weather that let me admire those green trees. However, as if on cue from a bad movie, the car sputtered and stalled. I tried turning the key again and again, but it refused to start. Gulps of fear started to surge in my throat, traveling from my stomach to my chest, making me wonder how I would get help, as there was no one around for miles. I pulled out my phone, praying for a signal. Miraculously, I had just enough to make a call for assistance. The dispatcher told me help was on the way, but warned it could take some time. So there we were, me, my 2 children, and a broken-down car in the middle of nowhere. The forest around us seemed to grow darker and quieter with every passing minute. Even the cicadas, which had been buzzing incessantly, seemed to hush. After an hour, maybe, we saw a car coming toward us with its headlights on. "Thank God," I murmured, relieved. When it came closer, I looked out and saw it was an old pickup truck that rumbled to a stop behind us, and a scruffy man climbed out. He looked to be in his late 40s, with greasy overalls and a trucker hat that had seen better days. "You the one needing help?" he asked, his voice rough and gravelly. I hesitated, but nodded. "Yes, my car won't start." "I'm a mechanic," he said, though there was no sign of a shop or tools in his truck. "Let me take a look." Reluctantly, I popped the hood. He began poking around, muttering under his breath. "Looks like a loose wire," he finally announced. "Come here, I'll show you." Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact, or how he seemed to linger too long near the driver's side of the car. My instincts screamed at me to stay put. "I'll stay here, thanks," I said firmly, gripping the steering wheel for reassurance. He straightened up and looked at me, his expression hard to read in the dim light. "Suit yourself," he said, but there was a tinge of frustration in his voice. He returned to fiddling under the hood, his movements growing more agitated. His body language was making me uneasy. Slowly, I took out my phone, not bringing it in front of him, and texted my dad, asking him to send a nearby couple to help. I explained the whole situation in the text. After texting, I started looking out from my rearview mirror, expecting something or someone to emerge from the woods. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. My heart raced as I tried to keep calm for my kids, who were still blissfully asleep in the back. The man stepped back and slammed the hood shut. "I can't fix it out here," he said. "You'll need to come with me to my shop." "I think I'll wait for the help I already called," I replied, my voice steady but my palms sweating, wondering when the nearby family would arrive since my dad had already replied, saying, "Okay." The mechanic, however, didn't like that. His face darkened, and he took a step closer to the driver's side. "Lady, it's gonna get real dark out here soon. You don't want to be stranded, especially with kids." His words felt more like a threat than advice. I glanced at my phone, praying for the couple to arrive. After a moment, it felt like my prayer was answered. The lady contacted me. "Hey, Uncle told me about you. I'm nearby. What's your car number?" she asked. Without a second thought, I waved my hand. "What are you doing, lady?" The mechanic smirked. I told the number. "Okay, I see you," she replied, and I saw her waving her hand as she neared. "My brother and sister are here, so you can go." "Thank you," I said firmly, looking at the mechanic. His smirk faltered. The car gradually came near mine. "Hi, sis, what happened?" the woman's husband asked, playing along as if he were my brother. He smartly and confidently got out, shook hands with the mechanic, and with a soft smile and gestures, convinced him to leave. As the mechanic drove off, the couple helped me fix the car. It was a minor issue, so some screwdrivers and petrol did the trick. I warmly hugged the lady and shook hands with her husband before continuing the drive. Thankfully, I reached home safely by 1 a.m., and the best part was that neither of my kids woke up, sparing them any fear. It's been years, but that incident is embedded in my mind. I can't forget what happened at night. We were almost in the biggest trouble. If the couple hadn't come on time, we could have faced the worst situation. In 2020, when 4 of us that night, me, Jake, Eric, and Chloe, packed into Jake's old beat-up Jeep and set out around 10 p.m. The air was sticky, the kind of heavy summer heat that clings to you. The drive to Wayne National Forest was uneventful at first, just a stretch of dark highway with the occasional glow of a distant farmhouse. The trailhead was our destination. We decided to pitch a tent at a remote spot, leading to the infamous cabin. It wasn't on any official map, just a whispered location passed down by those who claimed to have seen it. "Let's see if this haunted cabin is real," Jake said, grinning as he turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to the forest. The trees closed in around us as the Jeep rumbled along, the headlights barely piercing the thick canopy. Something about the darkness felt wrong. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a suffocating kind of dark, one that seemed to press against the windows. Then we saw it. A pickup truck was parked at the trailhead, its headlights off, its body rusted and dented. It looked abandoned, but something about it felt off. "Looks like we're not the only ones here," Eric said. Jake shrugged. "Probably just hunters." We parked a little ways back, unsure if we wanted to keep going. The silence was absolute. No wind, no crickets, just the soft ticking of the Jeep's cooling engine. Then Chloe broke the tension. "Guys, look!" Ahead, barely visible in the moonlight, was a narrow wooden bridge. It spanned a shallow creek, its old planks warped and crooked. Standing on the bridge were 6 or 7 figures, cloaked and hooded. Each held a torch, the flames casting flickering shadows that danced across the trees. And they weren't just standing. They were blocking the bridge. "What the hell?" Jake whispered, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. While looking there, we saw one of the figures walk forward. The torchlight showed that he was carrying something in his hand, an axe. "Turn around," I said, my voice breaking. "Turn the hell around." Jake threw the Jeep into reverse, the tires skidding on the loose dirt as we backed up. The cloaked figures didn't move. They just stood there, watching us, the flames of their torches glowing brighter as we retreated. When we finally reached a wide enough spot, Jake spun the Jeep around, the tires spitting gravel. The drive back felt like a blur. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode. I kept looking out the back window, half expecting to see the cloaked figures running after us. "Did you see their faces?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "No," Eric replied. "They were just shadows." We didn't stop driving until we hit the main highway, the lights of a gas station coming into view like a beacon of safety. We pulled in and parked under the harsh fluorescent glow, finally feeling like we could breathe again. "What the hell was that?" Jake asked, his knuckles still white from gripping the wheel. "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "But I'm not going back to find out." When I got home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd narrowly escaped something terrible. I told my dad about it the next morning. He was a forest ranger, and while he usually laughed off the crazy stories people told about the woods, this time he didn't. After all, it happened with his child, so how could he laugh? He listened quietly, his face unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "There have been reports of such activity in that area for years. Strange things, rituals, symbols carved into trees, abandoned campsites with unusual items." "What do you mean, unusual?" I asked. He hesitated. "Bones. Symbols. It's better not to go in depth into such things." My dad wasn't the kind of person to exaggerate, and hearing him confirm what we'd seen made it all the more real. I didn't tell Jake, Eric, or Chloe what my dad had said, but we agreed to never go back to Wayne National Forest until we were 20. Yet, we do not speak much about that incident, while I'm just waiting for when I turn 20 to go there again. Meanwhile, we are exploring other camping spots with a bunch of groups to understand more about the forest world and its secrets. Yet one thing is confirmed: I will never go in depth into their secrets. After the semester, Catherine and I set off for an adventure in the Appalachian Mountains for around 2 weeks. We booked a rustic cabin and decided to enjoy our time there in solitude. The first week was bliss. The air was clean and fresh, unlike the usual city air, full of smoke and pollution. Every morning, we'd lace up our hiking boots and hit the trails, marveling at the towering trees and the occasional deer that crossed our path. Nights were spent on the cabin's small porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea, and stargazing. It was perfect until the start of the second week. It was Tuesday at noon. Catherine had decided to take a nap after lunch while I stayed outside to read. All was peaceful. I was lost in my book, not realizing the chaos brewing just at the gate. Out of nowhere, 3 masked figures appeared in front of me, walking toward me. My heart lurched as one of them lunged at me, their face obscured by a dark ski mask. Before I could react, a stick struck my arm, sending my book flying. "Stop! What are you doing?" I screamed, but they didn't answer. Panic and fear gripped my vocal cords and tightened my chest. It escalated further when another attacker threw a rock that grazed my shoulder. Pain shot through me like fire, but adrenaline quickly took over. I tried to run toward the cabin, but one of them grabbed me, shoving me to the ground. Catherine must have heard the commotion because the next thing I knew, she burst out of the cabin, shouting, "Get away from her!" She ran straight into the fray, wielding a metal flashlight like a weapon. For a moment, I thought her bravery might scare them off, but they were too strong. One of the attackers yanked the flashlight from her hands and pushed her down. "Catherine!" I shouted, crawling toward her, but another blow landed on my back, knocking the wind out of me. The attackers then turned their attention to the cabin. They kicked the door open and stormed inside. Catherine and I were left lying in the dirt, bruised and gasping for air. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaky. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. Everything hurt: my arms, my back, my pride. The sound of breaking glass and the thuds of overturned furniture filled the air. They were ransacking the cabin, taking whatever they could find. I felt helpless, lying there in the clearing with Catherine. Catherine swiftly reached for a pistol we had brought for safety. Meanwhile, I managed to take out my phone and text Sam and Ken, the hikers we had met earlier. With Catherine's help, I stood up, leaning on a nearby rock for support. She gripped my hand tightly, guiding me inside the cabin. Then, with remarkable focus, she fired the pistol, aiming at their feet, legs, and hands. When they fell, we used scarves and clothing to tie them up, locking them in a room. "Hi," Sam called, knocking at the door shortly after. I opened it, and we quickly explained everything. Sam took charge of the situation, calling the police. He made us sit on the couch and brought us food to help us calm down. About an hour later, the police arrived. Sam led them to the locked room. I was terrified they might have escaped, but thankfully they were still there. The police swiftly took control of the situation. Catherine and I showed them our injuries and described what had happened. An officer inspected the cabin, noting the damage the attackers had caused. "You've done a great job catching them." "Worth it," the dispatcher said before leaving with the culprits. Catherine and I collapsed onto the couch, completely drained. "So, what now?" Sam asked. "Do you want me and Ken to stay here, or would you rather come with us?" We chose the second option. We didn't want to endanger Sam and Ken's lives. With their help, we packed our bags and rode in Sam's car to a crowded campsite where other campers were partying. Catherine and I had no energy left. Sam guided us to an empty tent. That night, we lay down together, the peace of the place and the sense of safety helping us fall asleep faster than we'd expected. Exhausted from the chaos and memories, we didn't even stir at midnight. The more we slept, the calmer we felt. The next morning, we didn't wake up early. It was nearly 11 a.m. when Sam called my name. "Yes," I responded, unzipping the tent. "All good?" he asked. "Yeah. We're thinking of leaving today, after breakfast." He nodded. As planned, we packed up and left the campsite around 1 p.m. I drove the car while Catherine rested. Back home, I told my dad everything that had happened. He listened intently, his face darkening with worry and anger. My dad, a retired Army officer, had always been my rock. He insisted on accompanying us if we ever decided to visit the area again. He was proud to hear that we had fought back and managed to capture the attackers, but placed restrictions on us, no more camping for 2 years. I wholeheartedly agreed, given what we had experienced. Now, I'm counting down the days until the 2-year restriction ends. I plan to return, not just to combat my fear, but also to find the part of me that was lost in that chaos and reconnect with the serenity of the Appalachian wilderness.